Lee Strobel tells the story of Bob Pierce, the founder of World Vision. It's an international outreach agency. Bob Pierce had cancer himself, but before he died, he made a trip to visit a colleague in Indonesia. While he was there, they were walking through a small village, and he came upon a young lady laying on the side of the road next to the river. And Bob Pierce asked his friend, he says, "Why is this woman laying here? Why isn't she in a clinic somewhere?" And going through interpreting, he found out that this woman was dying of cancer, and she didn't want to be in the clinic. She wanted to spend her last days by the cool of the river. Bob Pierce knelt down and held her hand, and even though she couldn't understand him, he prayed for her. And then she said something, repeated it several times, and his friend said, all she's saying, he says, "I just wish I could sleep. I wish I could sleep again." Bob Pierce reached into his pocket and pulled out the bottle of pain pills that he had. And he gave them to his friend, and he says, give her one at night for as long as the pills last or as long as she lasts. That doesn't sound like so much until you realize that Bob Pierce could not sleep at night either because of the pain of his cancer. And there would be 10 more days in the jungles of Indonesia before he would reach any place that he could get a refill of his medicine. Bob Pierce that day learned the price of showing kindness and compassion to someone. In Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 and 23, it says this, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law." We're in our 5th week of the study, The Good Life, where we're looking at the 9 ingredients that are found in what we call the fruit of the Spirit here, and how they are ingredients for living the good life. And today we come to kindness, or another word for that is compassion. We come to that. And so that's what we want to study today as a key ingredient to the good life. Listen to this statement. I think this helps us define what kindness or compassion really is. Sympathy is something you feel. Compassion or kindness is something you show, or better yet, something you do. You know, one of the things that makes life special is when we hear the stories of compassion like Bob Pierce, or we experience them ourselves. But without a doubt, the greatest illustration of compassion is a story that is found in Luke chapter 10, and we're going to spend all of our time right there in Luke 10 if you want to turn there. And what is the story of the Good Samaritan? The story teaches us that we can never separate our relationship with God from our relationship with mankind. Now, this is how the story came to actually come about because of that question of what we do with God and what we do with people. In Luke chapter 10, starting with verse 25, it says this, "On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. 'Teacher,' he asked, 'what must I do to inherit eternal life?' And Jesus, being the master that he is, turns the question back to him. He says, 'You're an expert in the law.' He said, What does the law say?" And the man says, "Well, it says to love the Lord your God with all your heart and mind and soul, with all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus answers him back. He says, "You've answered well." He says, "Now go and do that." But this is where it takes a turn. Verse 29 says this, "But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, 'And who is my neighbor?'" You know, we want to look at first some things that compassion is not, that kindness is not. And number one, it's not academic. When I think, what I mean is knowing what to do is not the same thing as doing it. You know, knowing it but not responding isn't good enough. This expert in the law knew the passage so well that he quoted it to Jesus. He was considered an expert by the Jewish people. Yet he was looking for a way to avoid obeying the commandment that was there. Knowing isn't doing. You know, being a student of compassion or a fan of compassion or to be touched by the stories of compassion does not make us a compassionate person. It's only when we show compassion. So that's one thing that compassion is not. Compassion is also not abstract. Look at verse 30. In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Jesus was saying, we're not going to talk about this in a theory sense. We're not going to talk about this abstract. He said, I'm going to paint you a picture. I'm going to give you a vivid picture that you'll never forget, and we're going to discuss that. And as Jesus continues to tell the story, he says that a priest comes by and sees the man lying there. But the priest just crosses the road and passes on by. A priest knows what to do. He spent his entire life studying the law of God. It wasn't a question of he didn't know what to do. He knew what to do. We don't know this, but it's a good possibility that this is what was taking place. A priest, 2 weeks a year, would serve at the temple in Jerusalem. I mean, this was the highlight of being a priest, was go and spend that 2 weeks at the temple. It's fair to assume, and like I say, we can't say for a fact, that this man was traveling to the highest point of his spiritual high point of his whole year. Or he was returning from spending 2 weeks on a spiritual high. But still, he didn't tie it together of he needed to stop and help this man. A Levite served at the temple, but he didn't see the correlation to stop. These were considered by the people the number one and number two holy people of all of Israel. But it was just an abstract idea to them. You know, this is Victory Sunday, a Sunday that where we started some years ago that in January we would take a Sunday and we would kind of celebrate some of the things that happened in the past year, some of the things that we've seen we've been blessed by. But I also think back to just past this year, but back to 2016. Do you remember when we took part in the Nazarene Project? When we heard the word that there were Christians in the Middle East, particularly Syria and Iraq, who were being exterminated, who was being marked on their house, the Arabic letter of the U that just means Nazarene. It looks like a U does, but it means Nazarene. So if you were connected with Jesus of Nazarene, you were run out of your homes, you were killed, your property confiscated, everything. And as the word began to spread, Christians, just like you, began to say, I can't sit here and do nothing. That's just like somebody across the aisle from me, that's somebody coming in doing this to them, and I do nothing. So you gave generously to the Nazarene Project. And Eric got this update and gave me this week. The Nazarene Fund was started with the idea of rescuing 400 persecuted families in the Middle East. But this is what has taken place since that inception. Over 35,000 have received emergency humanitarian aid. Not 400, but 8,202 people have been evacuated to safe countries. 5,462 people have been resettled in homes in safe areas in the Middle East. But it even went further than that. Medical clinics have been built, schools rebuilt, trauma units set up in these countries, community centers, vans purchased to transport these refugees, and then finally 2 of the churches that were destroyed by the extremists have been rebuilt for the Christians to serve in. That's not abstract. That's doing something. You know, so far we've talked pretty much about what compassion is not. But I want us to look in this story and see what compassion really is. Compassion begins with what you see. Now, already in the story, Jesus tells that a priest passed by and a Levite passed by. But there's another traveler. He comes by. Look at verse 33. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was. And when he saw him, he took pity on him. You know, all three of the travelers looked at the man, but apparently only one saw him. Saw him for what he was. Do not pass over this too quickly. The first step, I believe, to having compassion is we have to see things as they really are. You know, and if we didn't know Jesus by other things, by reading the Bible and studying about him for years and years, we would think that Jesus is just trying to rub it in here by using a Samaritan. And what I mean was this, you know, when he's telling this story, the expert of the law, the Jewish crowd that's listening there, they would go, oh, priest, oh yeah, they're good. A Levite, oh, they're all good people. A Samaritan, what is he doing in the story? You see, because they considered the Samaritans second-class citizens. They despised them. They considered them half-breeds. They considered them people that through their history had made so many bad decisions that there was no need even trying to redeem them, to help them out. But Jesus is trying to shock these people into seeing past their stereotyping, past just overlooking people. He's saying you need to see people. You see, for Jesus, compassion began with what he saw. In Matthew 9, it says he saw the crowd and he saw them as weary and confused, and he had compassion on them. Matthew 14, it says he saw the crowd of people and he healed their sick. Mark 6, it said he saw the people as sheep without a shepherd, and so he spent time and he taught them and gave them direction. Jesus saw opportunities when he saw a person that was a mess. Opportunities to show compassion. It didn't matter if they were lost. It didn't matter what color they were, what nationality. It didn't matter if they were physically sick or repelling to anyone. It didn't care if they were poor, if they were widows, if they were mothers who had lost their sons. He touched lepers. He put his hands on the eyes of the blind and on the ears of the deaf. He befriended and sat down and ate with the outcasts of all society. He took children into his arms. In his dying moments, he showed compassion to a dying criminal and took care of the future for his mother. Jesus saw people, and that's what he's trying to teach us in this story here. Now, after he saw people, he had to do something. And the Samaritan does the same. And that's the next point we need to grab hold of. Is after you see something, you must do something. Look in verse 34 there in Luke 10. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him. He took a risk because the robbers that could have robbed this man could have robbed him. And I suppose that is what separated the Samaritan from the priest and the Levite. He took a risk. Have you ever helped anybody who was falling in the mud? You get muddy. Have you ever helped anybody that's bleeding? You get bloody. But Jesus, the Samaritan, said we must do something. The 117th annual Boston Marathon was run on April 15, 2013. This is the year that the terrorist bombs exploded at the finish line of the Boston Marathon, killing 3 people and seriously injuring some of 264 people. I remember that day so vividly. For some reason, it just sticks out in my mind. That you first heard the reports, and it was just followed with anger and confusion, even fear, disgust that people would do this. But I remember being home that night and began to watch on television the actual filming. That was actual video of the explosions. And there were 2 explosions within 12 seconds of each other. And the thing that just captured me, and it still chokes me up today, is when the explosions happened, like you'd expect, there was the confusion and the terror. But what just grabbed my mind instantly was what people did. They didn't run away. They ran to. And you go back and look at it yourself. People ran instantly to the points of the explosion to help. And I remember, just like I'm doing now, that I welled up with tears. And it was tears of pride that people would do that. And I said, that's the kind of person I want to be. The one who runs to the problem and not away. After you see a need, you have to do something. You have to. I read the story this week of a Christian leader who was speaking at a women's conference. And right before he got up to speak, a lady came to him and said, we've just received word that one of the missionaries we support is in dire financial need. Would you lead the group in prayer that need can be met? And he stepped to the podium and he shocked the people by saying, there's a missionary who has a tremendous financial need. But instead of praying for them, what we're going to do is I'm going to take the money out of every penny I have in my pocket and I'm going to put it in the offering plate, and I'm going to ask you to do the same thing. And after we count the offering, if there's not enough money to meet this need, then I'll pray for the missionary. And as you might imagine, when they counted the offering, there was more than enough money to meet this financial need. You see, sometimes God expects us to be the answer to the prayer. God expects us to be the answer to the prayer. Sometimes we can be the answer to that prayer right here at home. This past Christmas, and as what has become our practice, is at Christmas we have a project or projects to do at Christmas. One of the projects this year, and I hope you can see these well enough, was we adopted, if you might say, children in our school system, in our elementary schools. We contacted people in the schools and said, let us know some children who won't have a Christmas this year. And the best of my count, we provided Christmas out of this congregation, 79 children in the school systems. And as you can see from these pictures, when you deliver them, when we carried them into guidance counselors' offices, they were just left a path for them to walk to their desk. That was all that was left. There were bicycles everywhere. We loaded, the bus was the delivery method that we used, and we just loaded up to the different schools. One thank you note I got back from a school, I think, says it the best. It says, we cannot thank you enough, talking to the members of Macedonia, it says, we cannot thank you enough for your outpouring of God's love that you showed to our students. The Christmas gifts that you provided to our students was just amazing. Your love and kindness helped a lot of our families and made a lot of children happy Christmas morning. And down to the last line, this is what I liked. It says, your kindness does not go unnoticed. Thank you again for all that you do. That's not the only thing that I want to mention. I want to mention that there are children in our school systems who go home hungry, especially on the weekends. For whatever reason, they're not cared for on the weekends, and there's a national program, Blessings in a Backpack. And our seniors group has adopted that as one of their projects. And several months out of the year, they meet and purchase and pack those backpacks and deliver them to the schools so that children who do not have anything to eat on the weekends or people to provide for them, they're taken care of. Through Friends of God ministry here in Williamston, a number of our people right here have taken a very active part in the Friends of God food distribution. So twice a month, they're passing out food to needy families. And that's a program that is working fantastic. These are things that we can do as a church. These are things that we have done. These are things that we will continue to do as a church as long as we have compassion, as long as we have kindness in our hearts, that we can be the answer to the prayer in our community. One more thing here. Compassion is about what it cost you. It's about what it cost you. Look at verse 35. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you have. This is so profound, yet so simple, so clear. Don't let cost stop you from showing kindness. Don't let it stop you. If it's time, don't let it stop you. If it's pride, don't let that be the thing that stops you. If it's emotion, don't let that stop you. If it's money, don't let it stop you. Jesus is saying, don't let any of these things stand in the way of showing compassion, kindness. Now, please, please, please don't think that what I have shared so far about what we've been able to accomplish in 2017 is about bragging. I do not mean that at all. But we need to know and we need to celebrate some of these things and be inspired by some of these things. We also, in 2017 as a church, we supported 4 North Carolina new church plants, new churches that are growing up in communities to reach those people. We supported missionaries in Ghana, India, Mexico, Indonesia, Ireland, Rwanda, Burma, Bosnia, Korea, and Vietnam. We support pioneer Bible translators that exist for one reason, and that's to send people into areas of this world to learn the language and put it on paper so they can translate the Bible for the first time into their language. We support Campus Christian Fellowship on 4 of the North Carolina campuses. We supported 5 Bible colleges, 2 church planting organizations that exist to plant new churches, 1 orphanage. We supported local organizations for helping the poor, the needy, along with the countless number of individual requests that come to us and we were able to help. Through those things, lepers were helped, the poor, the dying, the distressed, the diseased, orphans, the persecuted, children who have been sold into slavery have been liberated, women and men who have been sold into the sex trade, liberated. And most importantly, those people around the world, United States and around the world, are hearing the message of God. Not just because of Macedonia, but because of people like of Macedonia and people around the world who have compassion for people. You remember how the story started of the Good Samaritan? An expert of the law asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" And this is how Jesus ends the story. Look at verses 36 and 37. Jesus says this. He says, "Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hand of robbers?" The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." This is a beautiful conclusion to a beautiful story. It's beautiful because it contains a choice and a chance. He gives the man a choice. You can go and do what the Good Samaritan did. That's your choice. Or you can remain as you are. But he also gave him a chance, or as I say, a second chance, to be a person of compassion. To move from the academic, the theory, to a person who actually does things. You see, and that's been extended to us. A choice and a chance to do this. As proud as I am and inspired as I am by what we do as a group called Macedonia Christian Church, nothing will ever, ever, ever rise to the level that the church can do that what you do on a daily, a weekly basis out on your own. The acts of kindness and the acts of compassion that you do on an individual basis, they're much more important than what we can do as a body of believers. So you have a choice. You have a chance. We as a church have the choice and the chance. Compassion. You want the good life? Then become a person of compassion.